Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Angie Sanchez. I am a PhD student at Michigan State University in the Department of Geography, Environment, and Spatial Sciences. And my research focuses on increasing access to breastfeeding support resources in Indigenous communities. So this project here, this is going to be a part of my work eventually. I mean, it is my work. I have brought to the table today two Indigenous IBCLCs to discuss different topics. They have a program that's called the Indigenous Lactation Counselor Education Training Program, and that program is an Indigenous designed, Indigenous led for Indigenous people training to give foundational lactation education to Indigenous people so that they can counsel their community members themselves. And it's a great training. I've been through it several times. And
5 times.
yes. You don't need to do it. You just can do it one time and you're good. Anyway, the question that I get most often so for part of my project, I'm having Cami and Kim do the training in Michigan, in 5 different communities. And so the question that I get the most is from non-Indigenous people is, can I join the training? And when I say no, well, do you have any, what kinds of things do you have to offer? So for non-Indigenous people that work in this space. So I came up with the idea to do these webinars as a way to have information available and at the ready for non-Indigenous healthcare workers that are interested in, I guess, in learning about some of our cultural intricacies that they may not, have access to, and be able to have this available for healthcare providers. So that's why I started this series. And, it's just a way to help support our people, Indigenous people, because they will be the ones receiving the care that you, if you're healthcare providers, that you provide to our people. So we're just trying to help make that a little bit better for our people. So I appreciate everybody for being here, for listening, for registering, for being a part of the work that I do. I'm super, super grateful for it. So with that being said, we're going to get started. I'm just going to pass the mic over to Kim and Cami and let them take it from here. Thank you.
Do you want to reintroduce yourself? I'm like, I don't know how many new people are on each one.
I don't either.
We're probably like.
Okay, I'll go. Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Morsales. I am Dene. I am originally from Arizona, born in Tuba City on the Navajo Reservation. I currently live in Northern California, Humboldt County, among the Hupa, Yurok, and Karuk people. I'm also a lactation consultant for over 12 years, co-instructor with Cami on the Indigenous Lactation Counselor course, and do various community work throughout Indian country. And we're here to support those that need more information, especially healthcare professionals, to improve practices in assisting those Native families that come into your space, and hoping you can learn and just kind of increase your knowledge in the things that we see as Indigenous people, and just give a different perspective on the lens that we can share with you today.
Yeah. All right. I'm Petiwashte. Mitakiapi. Good afternoon, my relatives. I'm Cami. I'm Sisseton Wahpeton from South Dakota and live in Duwamish Territory, also known as Seattle, Washington. And I'm a lactation consultant, full spectrum Indigenous doula, and a clinical social worker. Anyway, so we're really, happy to be here. This is our third and final webinar of the day. We have 3 more each day for the next 3 days. So super excited to talk to all of you again. If you've been with us all day, we appreciate you and your time. If this is new, welcome, and we're happy to have you. So this session is on the first feed, and we're going to try and just have more of like a casual conversation, and share some tips and things like that. But I think the first thing that I wanted to get out, and Kim, like as a hospital-based lactation consultant too, like has experienced a lot of this. I usually work with people after like multiple feeds, like after that first feed. But one of the things that's really important for everyone to understand is the importance of the first feed. So we've seen, we've both had the experience of seeing babies who just like that first feed doesn't happen, baby and their parent are separated or whatever the reasoning is, and it doesn't happen, and we miss that baby's cues, and then they go in for their long postpartum nap, right? Which is what a lot of babies do right after they're born. After that first feed is they'll nap for a good like 6 hours or something like that. And then if we didn't get a solid first feed in, then it's harder to get that going again. And those early days of breastfeeding are really important for kind of the long-term establishment of a solid breastfeeding experience. It's important for milk supply, latch, attachment, all of that kind of stuff. So we wanted to kind of talk about that first feed, and what we see and how we can help. I know we have healthcare providers on here. I also know we have several doulas, that we often as doulas are often the ones helping with that first feed as well. And so thinking about like, or a refresher of like latch attachment, how we do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Did you want to share anything around like your experience at the hospital and what kind of like what you see?
Yeah, I think I know a lot of times parents get concerned when it comes to that first feed and how we emphasize how important that is. And it is important, yes, but also understanding that babies are, um, they go in certain stages when it comes to that first attempt. And so during that first, we call it the golden hour, is really important. And that's why we want moms to know what skin to skin aid is and to initiate that first feeding. So skin to skin is just basically putting your baby more of an upright prone position like this. And of course, your baby's going to be no clothing.
Let me get the baby naked.
Okay, get the baby naked.
What it's going to be like in real real in the hospital.
Yeah. And this is what we want to see when we have that baby skin to skin.
Here we go.
So,
and they will be wearing a hat though.
Yeah, they will. Yeah, because they have to keep the head warm. And so mom is going to have her baby just like this, where she can kiss the baby's top of their head and want baby's head turned this way. Okay. And typically baby's going to have a cover over the baby, and the mom has to be naked skin to naked skin, meaning just her breast and the baby touching each other. And so this gives that time to not only bond with your baby, but also oxytocin to kind of start flowing. We talk about that love hormone, where it's very, very high after birth or during birth. And we want moms to take advantage of that time. So when we have mom baby skin to skin, this is the position we want baby to do. And what happens is babies tend to show cues at this time, where they typically kind of lift their little head and they start kind of looking for the breast. And these are cues that baby is going to show mom to initiate that first latch. So when babies are nice and content, we want moms to also feel calm and confident that baby will go to the breast, and having that assistance with either a partner or a nurse. I tend to have mom do this position first before I initiate the feeding. So when I'm helping a mom, one, I'm going to build that rapport with her and have her trust me. in those first few minutes and making her feel comfortable. And also that I'm going to ask permission to have her um, let me help her. So when it comes to skin to skin, this will initiate those feedings. And so with that, and Cami is going to show how we're going to initiate the latch if she's going to help a mom, how a baby should latch to the breast. But I typically start in this position first for at least a half an hour, or if baby is not latching right away, it can go after that, and it's okay. Babies do not need lots of volume. Again, the tummy is very tiny, the size of a marble or a cherry, and babies don't require a lot of volume. So first feeds and be anywhere from 5 to 7 milliliters, which is about a tablespoon, right?
Teaspoon.
Teaspoon. Is how much the baby's going to have. So I share that information with the mom to ensure, one, she's going to feel the oxytocin holding her baby skin to skin, also talking about feeding cues, what her baby's doing, but also talking about that the baby is not going to take in lots of food. That first afterbirth sleep will happen. However, we want to take advantage of those first initial feeds, which babies alert about maybe an hour or two after birth. So you really want to take advantage of that time and that opportunity to get the baby on. So in the hospital, this is what I would talk to the moms about. I don't jump in right away. I feel out the mom. And also, I'm having her hold her baby. And if I'm assisting the mom, again, I'm not going to hold the baby. I'm going to kind of guide her hand. So if Cami was helping me, she's just going to place her hand on my hand. So kind of like this.
So we might,
Yeah.
just help them out.
Yep. So this is what I do in the initial feed. And again, a lot of education, small words, nothing too overwhelming for the mom, and making her feel comfortable. So usually this is where I start first in that first feed. And that's really important to have mom feel comfortable, because even first time moms, they feel a little nervous and scared. They don't know how to hold their baby, and just kind of making them feel comfortable holding her baby.
Yeah, and especially if they had a hard birth, that's another thing that like can, I know we mentioned this in the other webinar too, but like that confidence from birth really kind of floods into to baby and nursing the baby. And so if mom's not feeling, or the parent's not feeling that great about their birth, then that's probably going to be continue to manifest in the nursing relationship. And when they first start going, right. So they might feel things like their body failed them, that their body didn't know what to do, that they couldn't do it, that, that kind of stuff. And so that's, can be a dark place that a lot of parents, it's actually really normal for parents to be there. And I think like just this setup of kind of like getting them there. And as caregivers, this is where we can kind of say things like, oh, your baby loves you. Like they're so at home being with you, or I can tell your baby feels really safe in that space, right? To help build that confidence back up and reinforce what they, that they have the tools they need to do this. I was thinking maybe if you want to talk a little bit about colostrum too, in the milk that babies will be getting in that first feed, and the importance of it, and the language that we use, when talking about colostrum.
So colostrum, I like to say that colostrum is that first milk that is available in mom's breast. Usually happens around late second to third trimester is when the colostrum is in mom's breast. We like to normalize colostrum as breast milk. Sometimes I use words like medicine, because it is medicine for our babies. That first feeding of colostrum is so important, because it actually primes the baby's gut to prepare for larger volumes as mom starts making more milk. So colostrum has a lot of antibodies that protects the baby from getting sick, a lot of protection in the gut flora, And so that colostrum is going to be small amounts. I like to say it's like concentrated breast milk, where it has a lot of good things that it protects the baby, so that baby can thrive in the world that they are in. Once baby's out of the mom's tummy, baby is now dependent on mom's milk, and so that is a life-giving and a very nourishing, important part of infant feeding. So colostrum, again, I mentioned that has a lot of good things, but it's not made to grow a baby. It's to inoculate the baby, to protect the baby from, again, any infections or anybody that comes in contact with the baby. And it's very small amounts for that first feeding. So the first feeding, again, one teaspoon for a first feeding. Mom can even hand express. I wish we brought the little tools for the hand
I
expression.
know.
Yeah.
No.
So hand expression can be a really good tool to give baby a few drops of colostrum until baby's able to take in more or latch to the breast. So a lot of times mom thinks that baby should latch and suckle well. Sometimes that may not happen, especially Cami mentioned that long, hard labor, or if mom is, had a tough time in birth and she's really tired, how do we get that milk to the baby? And so if the baby is not latching the first one or even two times, there's tools that you can do to provide that first breast milk for the mom and baby. But again, we want to try to initiate skin to skin. So I talk to moms about the importance of colostrum, that it is medicine. Again, building that rapport and that confidence for the mom is going to be really important for her because she's going to feel, again, tired, especially if the baby is really, really sleepy. And sometimes babies do kick, kind of kick away, and mom interprets it as baby doesn't want me. So we want to really emphasize that this is normal baby behavior. And again, just trying to give mom the tools with, again, words, confidence, again, helping her with the latch. And it for me, I've been in mom's room probably, I would see her in one day at least 5 times. I would go back and make sure she's feeling okay, because I think a lot of times they just want to make sure that they have some sort of support, especially if there are new moms and don't know what to do or what they don't know about feeding cues. So again, feeding cues is a really important part of infant feeding. Asking them, do you know what a feeding cue is? How do you know if a baby's hungry? Those are usually the questions they would ask. And Cami has a really nice video what those cues are, and this is a good opportunity to share with moms when to offer the breast. So again, babies will be sleepy, but there's different things you can do to help a baby go to the breast. Again, skin to skin is my go-to. Happens at least 90% of the time that baby will start showing little cues to go to the breast, especially that first couple hours of birth.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I have a question about colostrum. So in some of the research that I have done, I read in some studies that there are some like cultures. I don't know if it's different tribes or if it's just a cultural thing or if it's just specific to just different communities, but where colostrum is considered like anti-medicine, like it's viewed by that community as not safe for the baby. So the moms don't give that to the baby. Have you guys come across that in any of your work? And like, how did you handle that?
Most of the families I have encountered that, and it wasn't a lot, just maybe 5 families, not many, but they it's usually from another country that come.
Okay.
So it's a common, I don't maybe shouldn't use the word common, but so one is it's not a traditional practice. I do not believe that,
but
like
they
I
come in
don't,
with different perceptions of what
think
breast milk is.
Yeah.
And they, it's not something that they do like culturally. It's just something they've learned.
Colonialism has impacted how they, so where I've seen or heard of it is in some African countries. Somalia was one, so there's and it's one of those things that it somehow became a practice.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so one of the articles that I had read was yeah, a community that was writing verses from the Quran on like a chalkboard, and then they wash that with water and collect that water and give that to the baby
Hmm.
instead of colostrum
Mm.
until the milk comes in,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so that was it was just a really fascinating
Yeah, I think,
story. And
yeah.
it definitely does not seem to be like a cultural or traditional practice, because just from an evolutionary perspective, like it
Yeah.
doesn't make
Yeah.
sense,
For sure.
like
Yeah.
it really doesn't make sense. But there's been so many, there's a lot of things that we practice now culturally that were introduced to our, to
Yep.
our communities. And I often, some of the like common ones that I question in like the Native community, for example, is like that it's rude to make eye contact. Like, I believe that that is like something that was learned in boarding schools, of just like, you don't
Mhm.
make eye contact,
Don't
and
draw
it's like,
attention to
don't draw
yourself.
attention
Yep.
to yourself. But it's something that we kind of like ended up picking up and say like, oh,
Yeah.
that's how we do it. We don't, it's rude, or people are uncomfortable when we do that. And it's like, I'm
Yeah.
not sure about that. Right.
Yep.
So, but it is something, especially for like healthcare, for those that are healthcare providers here that work with Indigenous communities and other communities,
Mhm.
right? To kind of be able to know like
Yep.
how can we talk to a family about this? Because if they do have those teachings or know about that, then it's important to be able to talk to them and meet them where they're at. It doesn't help to just
Yeah.
say like, oh, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
actually like colostrum's awesome and really
Yeah.
good for your baby, and you should totally feed it to them. Like, that's not going to make them
Yep.
make that decision,
Yeah.
right?
For me, I think most of my families that would say something similar, um, one they didn't speak English, right?
Mm.
And they're coming to a country they know nothing about, and then they're they're here in the hospital, and we're doing all these things to them, and they have no idea.
Yeah.
So my go-to too is when I'm meeting where they're at, one, because I'm not going to force them to uh, believe what I say, but this is where I really feel it's important when it comes to language, even language barrier, is to get an interpreter.
Mhm.
Because I will not, you won't believe how many healthcare professionals I've been in it for a long time, where they assume that the more louder you talk to them, they
Yeah.
understand, or the hand
Louder and
gestures.
slower.
Yeah. And I'm like, they're not deaf, they're not stupid. Get an interpreter. Even for
Yeah.
my Spanish families that speak Spanish, I would always get an interpreter because I knew just enough to get by. But if it's something that they need to be explained in their language, then they understand. And that's the frustrating part is I think some healthcare professionals, they get lazy and they don't want to take the time. And it takes a long time. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah,
it
it's
took a long time.
double, right?
It's a long
Double. Yeah.
time. But I think it's just being standard of care. I mean, that's what you do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but it is a good question. And I think like when it comes to talking about colostrum with families, it's really important that we talk about it as milk.
Yep.
Because a lot of folks will, kind of say like, I'm gonna supplement until my milk comes
Yeah.
in, or I'm gonna, yeah, not breastfeed
Mhm.
until my milk comes in, or I wanted to breastfeed, but my milk didn't
Mhm.
come for 3 days. And so I was already formula feeding. And so that type of language, right? Even as healthcare providers, if we say, ask something like, has your milk come in yet?
Yep.
Or your milk hasn't come in, a family who doesn't know a lot about breastfeeding or lactation or the normal biological
Mhm.
like process of lactation is going to perceive that as that they don't have milk and something's wrong. And that's not the case, right? And so we really discourage kind of using that language that says things like, that their milk isn't in, because colostrum is milk. It's really important milk.
Yeah.
But like Kim said, it's not there to grow a baby. It's there to inoculate a baby. That's its purpose. Is it's really providing that baby with that medicine that parent has collected data for 9 months, hopefully 9 months of their pregnancy, 9-10 months of their pregnancy, about the environment that that baby's being born into. And that information is stored in the colostrum, those antibodies, everything like that, and is going to the baby at birth and saying, and that's why we call it like an immunization at birth, because it's really inoculating that baby against the environment, the germs and whatnot that can pose a danger for a vulnerable infant. That's what's happening with the colostrum. And so I think it's really important to talk to families about colostrum, talk about it as milk, explain how important it is to a baby, and and just describe it like families can understand, like if you say something like, this is just a really concentrated milk, it just has less volume, it has less sugar and water in it, this is the immune layer in your milk, and it doesn't go away at 3 days, we just have more sugar and water after
you're just
3 or 4
adding to
days.
the
We're adding to the
ingredients.
immune layer. So yeah, I think that's a really important piece, and that's the kind of stuff that we can talk to when that baby's having skin to skin.
Yep.
Right.
Totally.
We can drop that information and drop that knowledge with that family and answer any questions and put people at ease while baby's having skin to skin. And then baby's going to start doing their like, right. And like, and that's when we're like, okay, it's time to eat.
Yeah.
So yeah. Do you want me to show our feeding cues?
Yep.
So we're going to show a little video, and for folks that are here that are Indigenous lactation counselors, you've seen these videos in our class, but we're just going to show them for others. So this is a really good example of a feeding cue for a baby. So in general population, if we were just to ask 100 people randomly on the street, like, how do you know a baby's hungry? Probably 95 of those 100 would say when they cry, right? Like when the baby cries. And what we really want folks to understand, particularly like in these early days and early feeds, is that crying is a sign of distress, and that actually babies, if they're crying because they're hungry, they are way past the point of hunger at that point. So they, I'm like, they're hangry, right? They're hangry at that point. And we're going to have to settle them down before they can go back to the breast, right? And nurse well. And so this is a little baby. This is probably, I was holding this baby when I took this video. So we were in the hospital. This was probably baby's second feed. So I know this presentation is called the first feed, but still, it's a really good example of a baby's feeding cues. And when I, as a lactation consultant, or Kim and I as LCs, would want a baby to be fed, this is when we would be like, okay, it's time to wait, it's time to eat, like your baby's hungry. So baby's early feeding cues are going to be really, really subtle. To me, you can't go wrong with putting a baby to breast when they open their eyes. Like they don't even need to be showing other cues. Like if your baby was sleeping and they wake up, just go ahead and feed them. You cannot overfeed a breastfed baby. And it's also really important, like in those early days, that this baby go to the breast as often as possible, because they're putting in their order for their long-term feeding. So they're kind of saying like, hey, it's me. I'm this big, I'm this old, and I'm going to need this much milk. That's what those early weeks are doing. And it all starts with that first feed. So here is the video. There we go. All right. So I'm just going to press play, and you might be able to hear some noises. You might not. Okay. Yeah, my volume's not working, which is fine. So here you have baby. She's just kind of starting to move a little bit. You can tell her eyes are still closed, so she's still asleep, although that left eye is kind of peeking out a little bit. That's me kind of giving her a little jiggle. Eyes open a little. Tongue comes out and starts moving. Her head moving to the left and the right is looking for the breast. There's a big stretch for the breast, right? Looking for it. So another big stretch for the breast, right? Tongue keeps coming out, pursing of the lips. keeps looking for the breast, right? And eyes are still closed. So a lot of people would be like, baby's still asleep, like they're not hungry, right? And so that's a really good example of feeding cues. I'll just play it one more time for you all because it's just a minute long. But yeah, really, really good example of what these early feeding cues would look like in a newborn. And so this is where I would be like, I immediately after this video, I woke mom up who, they had both just, she had had her baby. I was holding baby so she could have her first postpartum nap. And I was holding baby, at this point for a couple hours, and she started waking up ready for her next feed. Okay. So these are what feeding cues look like. So this is not crying. I probably could have given this baby my finger or a pacifier, or got out of the rocking chair and done some more bouncing and jiggling and doing different things to try and get her to go longer, right? But that's not what we want to do. We want to give that baby right to their parents so that they can practice breastfeeding, because that second feed, third feed, all of that, like they're still learning and they're still working on it. And the sooner we get them nursing, the more capable and patient partner a baby is going to be. So they don't need to, they don't, like if they're super hangry, and then they go to the breast, then they're fussy, the mom's stressing out, right? Or the parents are stressing out, those cortisol levels are climbing in their body, right? And that just makes it that much harder for everybody else. So if we get baby early on in their feeding cues, then she could have probably gone another 15 minutes, like I said, and instead she could spend those 15 minutes practicing breastfeeding and practicing her latch of like, oh, got on, this doesn't work, unlatch, try again, unlatch, try again, unlatch, try again. And then it feels good. And then that baby can stay there and eat. So they're just going to be a more patient partner, which is going to be really important for that parent and building their confidence.
So less fluster, more confidence, more practice, gets easier with time, and mom and baby kind of get the hang of it after a while. So and I think if mom is feeling flustered and patient, she's more likely to give a bottle, or someone around her be like, just give a bottle,
Right.
So I think that's important for moms to understand that these cues are so important and how to identify them. And just like, I love that video to show families, like, this is what a feeding cue is. This is what they do.
Yeah. And they will take this information and they will go on for the next, several weeks and months, this is how I know my baby is hungry. And it will just help to build that confidence. And same with, and you want to bring in everybody, right? So if dad's in the room or the other parents in the room or grandparents, and make sure that you're telling everybody that this is how we know baby is hungry, right? This is not a time to give baby a pacifier and kind of keep holding them, grandma, right? Or like mother-in-law. Like that is a time to pass the baby on to their parents so that they can nurse and practice. Okay. Because these first days breastfeeding is like language, it's learned, or it's natural, but it's learned. So it takes time to figure it out. And in fact, like the person most capable of breastfeeding is the baby. And so we really have to rely on them and be patient with each other as we practice, as they learn. So yeah.
That's really super awesome information. Like even as a former breastfeeding person, for our cues, it was the crying. Like that's all I remember. I remember, and he had like two different cries. So one was for non-feeding related cries, but his hunger cry, like I could tell the difference. I'd be like, oh, nope, he's hungry. Or it'd be the other cry. And, my husband would bring him, he's hungry. And I'm like, no, he's not. That's a different cry. He's not hungry. That's something else. But, I wouldn't, even have known or even really paid attention to any of those other cues. And it's just awesome to see that video, because it's like from an evolutionary standpoint, like how amazing our bodies are. And even as that 2, 3, 4 hour old baby
Mhm.
knows exactly what she needs to do in
Mhm.
order to get fed and to
Totally.
survive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when a baby is having skin to skin with their parent, like we'll see that, and we'll
Mhm.
see them, and then that baby will just like go. And we've seen baby, even when you were talking about the
Mhm.
kicking,
Yep.
that babies do, that's oftentimes to go to the breast. And so, a baby can be skin to skin, everyone's cuddling, and then they start doing their,
Mhm.
and then they'll just be like flop, right? Like, and they like literally like pop over to the left or the right. And it's like, your baby's ready to eat,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
or you might be like auntie and holding the baby, and then the baby is just like, and like
Mhm.
moves their way down, because they know what to do and they're capable of doing it, and they're looking for the breast and trying to get close to it. And so that's when, we say like your baby is ready to eat. When we talk about feeding a baby on demand,
Mhm.
we're kind of saying like, you feed your baby whenever they ask for it. When your baby like launches off your, your chest to your
Mhm.
nipple, that means they're hungry, they're asking for it. And so it's really cool. And yeah, and just thinking about crying too, like from an evolutionary perspective, like it would have been dangerous, right? To
Mhm.
like have, if like we were crying
Yes.
to show hunger, like that could be dangerous, right? Predators
Mhm.
and
Yep.
stuff could know there's a vulnerable baby or a vulnerable animal,
A
or
vulnerable group of people, right? There's like,
totally.
oh, there's children there. We should go and
Yes, like it's a bunch
help
of
them.
moms
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
there, or
Yeah.
whatever. And so yeah, I do kind of struggle with like how we've actually really normalized
Mhm.
excessive crying in babies,
Yeah.
because I think that, and I understand why we do that, to prevent abuse. And at
Yeah.
the same time, like it is concerning, because I don't think babies cry as much as we think they should.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's yeah. Yeah. And if we just feed them earlier,
Mhm.
like they want to cry.
Yeah. Yep.
So, but it's a learning experience, and you kind of figure it out. And I do love like the difference between cries and knowing
Like
Yeah.
a tired cry.
tired,
Yes.
Yep.
hunger.
Mhm.
Yep. Like that kind of stuff.
Grouchy.
It's so good to learn
Yeah.
that. And parents do figure that out like right
Yeah.
away. And it's
Yeah.
the coolest thing.
So, in our earlier conversation with Melissa and Nathan, we had talked about you guys were, excuse me, got something in my throat. It's not a cry, I promise.
We're not going to cry.
We're not going to
on
cry
this
to
one.
this one.
Yeah.
Let's hope. We've cried at every single webinar so far. You guys were talking, you talked a lot about language
Mhm.
and how impactful that is and how important it is. And so for our healthcare providers that are listening, how often do you see healthcare providers, whether it's, I'm sure it's inadvertent, but say things to their clients or just even in the same room as them and not even saying it to the client, but just saying things that impact that first feed
Mm.
that are, or
What are you asking? Like, what have I heard?
like has that happened? Have you seen it?
Yeah.
What's, what are some of the things that are taking place that are harm,
I think for me is one, I hear your baby's starving, right? You must not have enough milk, so give it formula. Um, you know, you have small breasts, so you probably don't make enough milk. I mean, these are the things I heard at bedside, especially the anatomy of a mom's breast, of not being efficient to have her breastfeed. Like, again, your breasts are flat, so you can't latch the baby well, like things like that. So that to me has had a huge impact on families with just the initial feeding, because they're already thinking that they can't do it. And then again, their go-to is going to be formula, and formula is a whole different issue. That's like, given overfeeding, formula preparation. So that's a whole different thing. But yeah, those can be very, it can be very impactful for the mom too. breastfeed successfully with what the words they use.
Right. And so the thing is, so one of the things that you said was like, you might hear, oh, your breasts are too small, so you must not,
Mhm.
that may be fact, like that the mother does have small breasts, but that doesn't, mean that she's not making,
Mhm.
making milk or making enough milk. Or that's the other one. Oh, not making enough milk. Like,
Mhm.
how what can we do in general, or just as like lactation workers, to get healthcare providers in general to understand how, the language that's being used is, for them, just super transactional.
Right.
It might not mean much to them, but they need to understand how much it's impacting
Right.
the folks that they're working with.
Right. Well, and that kind of goes back to kind of the last session when we
Mhm.
talked about that Maya Angelou quote, right? Of like, people forget what you
Mhm.
said, but they won't forget the way you made them feel. And that's what we have to kind of think about, is like, what are we saying as healthcare providers, as those that are privileged enough to be with that family during their postpartum ceremony or their birthing ceremony, right? That we have been invited into that space to be with them, and how do we talk to them, and like, what are the words that we say, and are the words that we're saying building them up or
Mhm.
tearing them down?
Mm.
And oftentimes, like, the words that we might say to tear them down is our own insecurities, right? Because it's we as healthcare providers, like, we have a lot of pressure to not mess it up,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so if we have a knowledge gap, which most care providers do, right? So most doctors have had 0 hours of breastfeeding education. Most nurses come into nursing with 3 hours of breastfeeding education, many with none, right? So that is a huge knowledge gap. But we have a community that expects those people to be the experts in this thing,
Mhm.
right? And so that creates, like, that's the problem with putting people on pedestals and
Yes.
things
Yep.
like that, right? And so it creates this, like, there's this knowledge gap, and ego can get in the way of it, of like, I don't want to make it seem like I don't know what I'm doing. And so it's oftentimes protective, and because I don't think providers are intentionally
Mhm.
thinking, what can I say to be really super mean to this parent
Yeah.
and traumatize them? Like, that is never someone's intention, but it's our own human nature and our way that we protect ourselves and our own ego, is we put that on the parent,
Mm.
right? And we
Yeah.
say, like, I can't help you with this latch. And so instead of acknowledging that I don't know how to help, I'm going to then blame it on the parent and their body, right? Which is just like so
Yeah.
sick in itself, the
Mhm.
way and how early we pathologize, particularly women's bodies, and get them thinking that they don't have what they need,
Mhm.
and in fact, that's just not true. And that's the body that they have. A lot of people understand that, like, meeting a family where they're at, that includes the body that they have
Mhm.
grown and has kept them safe and brought them to that point, right? And it just grew a baby. Like, these are strong, amazing bodies, and we need to make sure that families recognize that. And so, but I do have empathy for providers at the same time, that
Mhm.
because they don't know, and it's like, yeah, like, it's hard. I mean, I do at this point, because there's a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
And so, if in 2022 you still don't know anything about breastfeeding, and like, there is some onus on you to learn this, and there's lots of information out there, but I do understand how difficult that would be, and that there's just,
Yeah.
it's a mix up.
The last few years I was at the hospital, we did an education on was language, how to talk to moms when she has her baby. Like your nurse did a great job. Say, so you're going to breastfeed your baby, right? Emphasizing that's the
You have the
option.
perfect breast for
Yeah,
breastfeeding.
you have the perfect for
What?
breastfeeding.
My
Oh,
double A's?
yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Okay. Sweet.
Also, you have enough. You have milk in there.
Yeah.
Breast milk is colostrum. Colostrum is medicine. So like using those words has really helped when we talked about it with the training we did, and actually increased our numbers for a good few months when we changed the language and everyone was on board. And that was something that I found really interesting, just in language itself. But the other was we had all the residents that had the time to spend in our OB department and labor and delivery. They would shadow me, and I had like 2 doctors at a time or 10 doctors, and it was really fun.
Yeah.
Because you're just in your element and you feel good, and for some reason the latch happened perfectly. I don't know how. It just everything was so great, and I'm like, damn, I want something to happen where I can have that teachable moment.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think when I was speaking to them, it was more about language too, of how they made the patient feel. Again, there's times where a family couldn't breastfeed for a baby not to latch for whatever reason, because sometimes it happens. I think for the families that it happened to, their main takeaway, not just the breastfeeding, but it's how you make them feel, how you make them feel. They will always remember you, that you helped them and understood. And I think that has to come across when it comes to patient care and empathy and showing humility, that you care about them and they
Right.
just want to be validated, that you're going through it with them and you're feeling these things with them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times doctors tend to think that they need to solve it. By
Yeah.
solving it just creates more.
Yeah. And that
problems.
solving is success.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's the thing. And it's like, no, that's not actually it. And I had I did a very informal, it was nothing official, like survey of families that I had worked with for a presentation that I did years ago on like guilt and shame in breastfeeding. And one of the things is I just, kind of reached out to people that I had served, but then also just people in my community, neighborhood kind of thing, parents, about, their interactions that they had with their lactation consultant or their nurse and things that were said. But one of the families that I had served was so sweet. And she said, she was like, working with you, like you actually didn't solve my breastfeeding
Yep.
problem,
Mhm.
because her goal was to exclusively breastfeed. And one of the things that we learned in our 3.5-hour visit is that she was very unlikely to make a full milk supply,
Yeah.
right? Like it was just the way her cookie crumbled. And so we spent a lot of our time just kind of redefining success and talking about like what's this going to be like for you moving forward, and that you are breastfeeding. And at one point she was like literally breastfeeding her baby and she's crying and she's like, I just really want to breastfeed my baby. And I was like, you are breastfeeding your baby.
Yeah.
Like you're literally, I'm watching you breastfeed your baby. Like this
Yeah.
is breastfeeding. And your baby is going to get lots of formula too. Like it's still, it doesn't mean that it's not breastfeeding. But her comment about it was like, you actually didn't solve my breastfeeding problem, but I knew you loved me, and I knew you loved my baby, and I knew you wanted what was best for us, and that was kind of like, I was like, yeah, that's right. I did that,
I love
like
that.
cause it's we weren't going to meet her goal like that. Just lots of families we can, right? Lots of families we're going to get to fully exclusively breastfeeding, but for her biology, her anatomy was not going to allow for a full milk supply. And that's okay, right? She still had the perfect breast for breastfeeding and she could still breastfeed. They just weren't going to provide 75% of the milk that baby needed, but she could still breastfeed, right? And so, yeah, I think that those things are all really important with like, how do we build up a family? How do we instill that confidence and everything? And just that they hear what we say and they're going to create their own stories about our own meaning, and so we do have to be really careful.
Yeah. I love that, redefining your success.
Yeah.
That's so important. Because it is what that is, right? Not everyone's going to have like this amazing breastfeeding story. And
totally.
yeah.
Like I can say like, I want to deadlift 500 pounds, and it's like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. But let's talk about what you can do,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what you want. Okay. You want to do 200? Well, you can do that.
Yeah.
Let's meet there. Right. Or like whatever that is,
Yeah.
and so we all have things that we're capable of doing, and we have to meet each family where they're at, and, and make goals for each, or follow each family's goals, right? And that's something, and I want to acknowledge how difficult that is in a mainstream medical system. Like it is, and Kim and I joke, like she'll giggle at me because I'm outside of the hospital system.
Mhm.
And so I'm like, I recognize how it's really easy for me to say that when I'm not serving 20 people a day,
Yeah.
when I don't have an average of 3 to 8 minutes to spend with a family, right? Which is what the reality of a lot of healthcare providers, because that is the system, right? That is the way the system is, regardless of, whether you want to spend hours with families, that's not the system you're in,
Yeah.
right? And so thinking about like, it is hard to then, or there is ease with kind of like creating these like very specific, like I want to see a family do this, this, and this. And there's no leeway for straying from that for each individual family. But we do have to be better at that.
Oh, yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
do have to, there is a way to do it. And if we get a family breastfeeding well, like it is in the end a lot less work for healthcare providers.
Oh, totally. Yep.
Right. Because
Yep.
like there's a lot less forever.
Yep.
Well, until
Yes.
it's you don't have a diabetic, you don't have like,
Yeah.
right, like all the
Absolutely.
things. If we
Sick people, you don't
Yes,
have
yeah.
respiratory infections,
Totally.
all these.
infant mortality,
Yeah.
like all
Yes.
these things. So if we put a big effort in those early days, it will result in less work later on that we can serve the people that really need it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
spend more time with them, right? The less sick people there are in the world, the more time we can spend with, with
Yeah.
people who need it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I viewed my breastfeeding journey with my son. Like
Yeah.
it was tough in those first few days, months, even before we knew, that he had a tongue tie and all this
Right.
other stuff. Those nights and getting up and having no sleep and
Mhm.
I just knew like this is so hard right now, but like this is just today. And before you knew it, like, you weren't heavy. I wasn't up all night long. And
Totally.
it was a gradual thing, right? It wasn't just one day the switch flips and all of a sudden, yes, now you're getting 6 hours of
Mhm.
sleep tonight instead of 2 or
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah.
It's a gradual thing, and yeah, very hard work in the beginning, but
Yeah.
definitely totally pays off at the end for everybody
Mhm.
Totally.
Yeah.
to put in all that hard work. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if do you guys have
Yeah.
anything?
So I was just going to say, because
Yeah.
we talked about feeding cues and the golden hour, it's skin to skin. I like to kind of see, like, discuss baby. Like, I know I didn't know when I had my children that babies are born with reflexes
Oh, yeah.
and how that can help with better latching or, making things a
Yeah.
little bit easier. Do you want to demonstrate
Talk a little bit about
the
that.
reflexes on a
Yeah.
baby?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
We talk about feeding cues.
yeah, feeding cues. And so when babies are born, they're born with reflexes. I mean, we could touch it, take a baby and go like this on their little foot, and their toes are gonna curl.
Or hit their knee.
Or hit their,
Yeah.
that's a reflex that
Yeah,
we still
yeah.
have, right? Where the knee, you hit there on the knee and the foot kicks up. Breathing is another reflex, swallowing is a reflex. So when babies are born, they're born with a lot of reflexes, and almost all of them are there to facilitate feeding, almost all of them. So there's a couple of things that are really important to know about when it comes to the first feed and when we're helping a baby latch on. So one is that there is, to trigger a baby's suck reflex, we actually have to touch way back by their soft palate. And so the soft palate is, for most of us, about midway between, so like my mouth and ear, it's about midway between my mouth and ear. Some of you might be able to feel it with your tongue if you wanted to just practice that kind of feeling your tongue on the roof of your mouth. There's a hard palate right up right above your tongue. And then as you move back, you can feel the tissue kind of shift. It's no longer soft. It's kind of like, or it's no longer hard. It's like soft, like juicy,
Kind of weird, kind of.
mucusy. Yeah, it's kind of weird. So that's the soft palate. So that's what needs to be triggered for a baby to suck, right? So for babies, if we just stick our finger in the mouth, our finger very quickly hits the soft palate. They start sucking. We take a pacifier, a long, plastic nipple, stick it in their mouth. It's going to hit that soft palate. They start sucking. Bottle, same thing, stick it in their mouth. They're going to start sucking. They can't help it. It's just a reflex once it's touched, right? So that makes it hard for breastfeeding though, because our breasts are typically, our nipples are pretty soft and pliable, and they're not these like 3-inch long, and so eventually they might get that long, but like 3-inch long. Give it a couple years of breastfeeding and they'll be that long. No, but they're gonna everyone's giggling at me. All right. So but the nipple is just not that way. And so we have to figure out a way to get our nipple back to that baby's soft palate, right? And this is why we need to have a baby latch on really nice and wide, because when a baby opens their mouth wide, right, that changes. So if we have a baby who has this is so cool being able to like have a camera. So if we have a baby and this is their mouth and the soft palate is right back here, right? If we just put the baby's mouth, like, or the nipple in the baby's mouth, it's not going to reach that soft palate. But when we open wide, it's right there, right? And the nipple's able to hit that soft palate. So that's kind of the way, kind of a good way to.
Yeah.
Have I done that before?
No.
Okay. Anyway, that's a good way to do it. So like, it just changes. So nipples in the same spot here. It's at the front of the mouth, and we have a baby that opens wide. And now that nipple is back by that soft palate.
Yeah.
So that's why a wide, deep latch is important, because we need the nipple to be back by the soft palate. So what we have to do then is utilize reflexes outside the baby's body to latch onto the breast, because when we put the nipple, if we just were to take a nipple and just stick it in the baby's mouth like this, that baby's just going to go like,
yep.
And because they can feel it, they can taste it, they can smell it. They're really, really close to it, but there is nothing right here that triggers a suck reflex. Remember, that's back here on the soft palate. So instead, what we're going to do is utilize the baby's reflexes to get them to open wide. So the first one that we're going to do is going from the baby's nipple to nose. So a lot of people, when they go to breastfeed for the first time, they hold their baby, and we'll just pretend this is, this is my breast.
And they're covered in blankets.
And they're covered in blankets, swaddled, right? Like they got, here, let me go here. There we are.
Yeah.
Hi. Okay. So, so if, my breast is here, and then a lot of times when people go to breastfeed for the first time, they have their swaddled baby, and then they actually put them in position to bottle feed them, right? So you can see like this is a really typical first time breastfeeding position. But look at my baby's mouth in relation to where my nipple actually lies on my body. This baby's going to have to like go down, right? Kind of like go down. They're going to be really shallow. It's going to be really hard for them to get a good latch. So instead, what we're going to do is bring my baby to my nipple, right? And where it lies on my body. So for a lot of people, this baby, again, their head was up here before, and now I've really moved this baby down here. They're wrapped around my body, so that they can line up with the nipple.
So they're tucked into your body, tummy to tummy, or close to tummy.
Yeah, tummy to tummy, belly to body.
Yeah.
They're turned in, things like that. So what I'm going to do is then take my nipple, and you can do this by like holding your own breast if you want, if that's what you're comfortable doing. Many people are. So most people like will kind of naturally grab their own breast. And so then we're just going to go kind of nipple to nose. So tickling the baby's nose, upper lip with the nipple. And when we do that, when we touch a newborn baby right here, it triggers a reflex in that baby to put their head back and open wide. So we're going like this, and baby's going to go like that, which is really cool. So this baby's going nipple to nose, and then they open wide and put their head back and kind of get into that CPR sniff position. Next, what they're going to do is their chin is going to hit their breasts next, right? Because they've gone nipple to nose, they put their head back, they open wide. And when they open wide, the chin hits the breast, and then the lower lip kind of plants there. So it stays right there. And the upper jaw goes up and over the breast. So the analogy we often use, and I have a hamburger, which we didn't bring in because whatever. But kind of when we eat hamburgers, it's kind of the same thing. We're going to take it. If you imagine this as a hamburger, I'm going to take it. I'm going to put my head slightly back. I'm going to put this on my lower lip and go up and over that hamburger, right? Because if I was to just bring it straight on like this, everything is going to come out. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a big bite of bread, right? And everything else is going to be gone. So instead, we put our chin, we plant our lower lip, and we bring our jaw up and over on the breast. And so a baby's going to do the same thing when they go to breastfeed for the first time.
Yeah.
Okay. So, should I show the video?
Yeah.
So we'll watch a video now of a baby latching on. So this is technically not the baby's first feed. This is probably, we'll call it like the 13th or 14th feed, because this is when they got home from the hospital. So one of the first feeds once the family got home. And so you can see this baby is just about a day old. We have the baby kind of in that cross cradle position, which I was just holding the baby doll in. He is asleep, so his eyes are closed, but he started showing those early feeding cues. And so I was like, okay, it's time to eat, let's get going. And so we're going to see how this mama, this is Temris, how she does this. So she's going nipple to nose, nothing, nipple to nose, a little open, nipple to nose, open wide, and latch on. Okay, so it's a really quick thing. So we'll watch it actually maybe one or two more times. So nothing, he opens a little bit, not wide enough. Then that next one was really nice and wide. And she just pushed him on.
I love that because she didn't, with that first little open, that she's like, nope, you're not having that. This is not right. And then does it again, and then it's right. And then
we do it.
Yep. That's awesome.
Because breastfeeding is like language. It's natural, but learned, right?
Yeah.
So this is just a really good example. And then thinking about feeding, or once a baby is latched on, does this feel like the right one to do? Or do you have anything to share?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
I think, I think this would be good to show a follow-up of what feeding should look like after the baby's latched.
So this is actually the second feed for this baby. This is post cesarean birth. This is a 36-week, 6-day-old twin. So there was two of them. We had the first feed in the OR after a scheduled C-section, and then this is the next feed. And so this is a really beautiful example of what like a awesome kind of early feed looks like. You'll be able to see this baby taking some nice, really big swallows. And this is colostrum, right? This is not necessarily like a copious supply of milk, but this is one where this baby is totally getting what they need. And so for me, this is, if I'm like the healthcare provider, whether it's a nurse or lactation consultant or whatever, this is one of my favorite things to teach parents, is how to know when their baby is swallowing. So we're going to watch this baby and watch them swallow. So swallow, 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 right? So every time that jaw drops down right here, that's a swallow, 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 swallow. So they're doing one suck per swallow, which is awesome.
Yeah. This is important too in those early feeds. Is a lot of times families feel like they don't have any milk. Breast feels not as full. They get really concerned about their milk supply already. This is a good tool, or just to show them that the baby is getting breast milk. So colostrum is breast milk, and it really puts the family at ease that the baby's getting something, and that to point it out, to show them the swallows, is really key for them to feel confident that they have milk in their breast, because a lot of times like, I don't have anything, I don't feel anything. And that's normal not to feel a whole lot going on. Again, colostrum is going to be small amounts throughout the breast. Moms will have enough milk. And so just using these techniques to show families that the mom has enough and baby's getting what they need for that feeding.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can watch it again and we can kind of show like, so when I was recording this video, I was watching this baby nurse, and this is basically how I went. I was like, oh my God. Oh my God, Lindsay, she's doing so many big swallows. I know you can't see her right now because mom had just had a
Yeah.
C-section. I know you can't see her right now, but she's doing a swallow, 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 swallow. Dad, come over here. I want to show you something, right? And then I teach dad, that's a swallow. That's a swallow. That's a swallow. That's a swallow, right? And then I'm like, can I take a video of this? I need to send it to my best friend Kim and show her how good your baby's nursing, right? Like that's kind of it. Cause it's like this thing of where I'm like building confidence, right? And
Yep.
really like making sure that the family feels assured that they're making enough milk. Cause this is a twin birth. So we really, she's going to have those normal insecurities around making milk times 2, right?
Yep.
And so like, can I make, even if she had a previous breastfeeding experience of a single tin that she made plenty of milk, but this is 2 babies, so it's totally different. So I'm like, building up her confidence, giving her some information, factual information about, that her baby's getting enough milk, but then I'm also engaging dad and making sure that dad is aware too. So, cause he's going to have those same insecurities, but maybe doesn't know how to talk about them, right? Or voice them. So I'm just going to show him. And so engaging that dad, bringing him in, wanting to show him like, look, your baby girls are getting plenty of milk. And then just, kind of like doing funny LC stuff of like, I need to send this video to my LC best friend and show her because this is so exciting, and so those are some things that we can do with families. But I think learning and knowing when a baby swallows is really important and really great information that we can share with a family so that when they go back home, because she went back home a couple days later, not breastfeeding because the hospital had completely derailed the situation. And the babies were put on preemie protocol and it was everything. And she was basically like pumping exclusively on, by day 3. And we just had to kind of like re-establish that confidence, that had been completely lost in her couple days stay in the hospital, of just like, no, look, your baby, there's plenty of milk, your baby's swallowing, they're latching great, like this is great. And she went on to, exclusively breastfeed the babies for the next 6 months, and then began supplementing after that, and, but continued to nurse the babies until they just turned 1 in June. So it's just a really cool thing. But I love teaching parents like swallows, grandparents, everybody should know when a baby's swallowing, like that they're getting milk. This is not saliva that they're swallowing. This is definitely milk. And it was really cool.
Yeah. Love that video.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we have any questions from people that are listening. We'll give you a few seconds. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please put them in the Q&A, and Kim and Cammie will try to answer them. But in the meantime, again, I appreciate everybody who has joined us and who has taken some time out of their day to listen to us and be a part of the conversations that we're having. I've been in the room with you two several times now for lots of hours, and every single time I learn something new. Like it's so awesome but also can be overwhelming, like, it's, for me personally, it's a, um, I still doubt myself. And,
Mhm.
if I'm trying to help somebody, I always reach out to like you guys, like,
Yeah.
hey, so
Mhm.
and so just asked me this, and I think this, but I'm not sure. Is this?
Right.
So it's just awesome to, be in space with you guys and still continuing to learn and, take in some knowledge. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think I see any
Jacqueline's
questions yet.
giving us love.
Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for joining us again. Look, we made it through without crying.
I know. I know. Yeah. It's amazing.
Barely.
Um, Another thing too is like I know that we talk about how latch um and how that should look like, but just emphasizing that there shouldn't be pain in latching. So
Mm.
Yeah.
asking that question of how does it feel is really important, because if the latch is not good, again, it can compromise a good supply. Mom not wanting to breastfeed because she's assuming this pain should be normal. I think Melissa's had a good example of breastfeeding for a very long time, but had those problems in the beginning, and her support people thought it was normal, and luckily she was able to figure it out that that it wasn't, and then that her breastfeeding journey went pretty good after that. But latching well does not hurt, so
Yeah.
I want to make sure we have that good assessment when we're helping families is how does it feel. Showing them how to relatch and unlatch is a good time to get that good latch. So
All right, so we do have one question up there.
Question, you comment. Yeah.
So do you have tips for talking to physicians to help moms build confidence? I often find as a hospital LC having to rebuild a mom's confidence after they've spoken with physicians.
Totally. Solidarity there,
Yes,
Teresa.
for sure.
I like, yeah, I constantly feel like I'm having to like undo the damage that happens, from other folks. But I'll let Kim take this one since she was in a hospital LC. And kind of how did you talk to providers? What are some tips you have for an LC? That's what I'm thinking is the
yeah,
question. Teresa, as a hospital LC, like
how to rebuild
tips for
moms.
how to know how to talk to
To
providers.
the
It
physician.
says I often find as a hospital LC having to rebuild a mom's
Right.
confidence after they've spoken with a physician.
Right. But I think
Right, but the first part
is,
of you
do
saying
you have
tips.
tips for talking
Oh,
to
To
physicians?
physicians.
So how
oh,
did you, because I know Kim, like, just, to set it up, like Kim has the experience of, was a peer
mm,
counselor, became an IBCLC, went into the hospital with very little experience. And I know that your confidence was built over time to where, maybe when you first started, you wouldn't feel that great about talking to a doctor, which,
no,
I don't know where Teresa is
yeah,
at, but, oftentimes like in the hierarchy of a hospital, an LC is pretty far down on the list, right?
unfortunately, yeah.
Unfortunately. And so how did you get to a point where you had that relationship? How did you talk to providers? What was the words that you use? Because, they have precious egos that we need to protect. And
um I remember when I started in a hospital setting, it was really challenging because I had one OB doctor, which actually respected me after I've been there for years. Told me not to talk over him when I was trying to talk to mom about breastfeeding. He was at the bedside. He was doing his own teaching moment or whatever. And I felt awful. I felt like, I wasn't important to be there. And I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. Um, for me, I think over time, I learned how to and I'm an introvert when it comes to big crowds and people in my workspace. So I tend to observe the room. I observe people's behaviors. That's what I do. And I tend to know how to navigate that in a way that I'm going to approach someone that is on my side, like a doctor that I work with before with a family. And if I know they're in the same department, I would talk to the doctor and say, I have this problem with this family and I need more support in supporting her in breastfeeding, but I feel like these feeds are going well and I don't feel like the family should be able to should supplement. And usually they give me some leeway to kind of work with the family and show um, you know, uh a good 2 or 3 feedings and document what I see. And again, it took time. Some doctors are approachable, some are not. In my case, over time, the doctor that said that to me actually was respected me. After a while, he would ask my opinion for families to go home and be discharged. But again, it took trust and my capabilities of how I assessed families, how I addressed them to, um, and became a little bit more assertive as well. I mean, even though I am an introvert, I can be assertive and when I need to be. And so, um, and really supporting those families was really important to me, especially the Native families that I served, because they didn't know how to advocate for themselves sometimes. And sometimes they get a little nervous about, how they're perceived as parenting in those first couple of days, especially if they have a history that they had trouble with past experiences of having taken their baby home or not. So again, building my support system with social work, doctors that tend to listen to me more to support those families to breastfeed. Um, and it took a long time. It was really hard. And I belong to a group for on Facebook for IBCLCs and the lactation, hospital lactation. I see a lot of um I don't know if it's abuse from doctors, but it's borderline.
I'll call it abuse.
Yeah, okay, borderline okay, abuse, and how they respond to lactation consultants, and it's hard, and I've been there, but I was lucky enough to again build that relationship with other doctors that supported me, that would talk to the doctors and gain that trust and knowledge. And that's kind of how I did it. And it took a long time. Again, it came from a WIC background to hospital, and it was pretty much learning on my own, reaching out to people that supported me. But it is hard. It's a tough position to be in. As far as like building that mom's confidence, again, Cami had some good tips about pointing out the feeds that it's going well. She's doing great. Look, your baby loves you, all those things to help her feel better about her experience in the hospital. Um, and nurses too, if you have a nurse that is willing to learn and saying, hey, I got this next feeding, I'm working with this mom, I don't want mom to get any formula. A lot of times the nurses just kind of stepped away and let me do my thing. And all they wanted was, again, wet diapers and not a lot of weight loss. And those are the 2 main factors that doctors and nurses look at. So if I can prove that, usually they just kind of lay low and they don't bother the family, and then provide them education going home, because they really want to see those documented. All about documentation, and again, seeing output and not so much weight loss, and then they can go home. So yeah, it was, again, I had to run around back and forth to the doctors and the patient and the nurse to kind of build that support system, that team to support the mother. And luckily I was able to do that in most cases. And sometimes it was really challenging. So I empathize with you if you're in that position where it's hard, because it is a hard place to be. And it can be a burnout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can say this because I don't work in hospital and I'm not a nurse and I never will work, be working for a physician.
It's good on
But
this end.
I would just be like, bro, are you the infant feeding expert? No? All right. Let me do this.
Let me do my job. Yeah.
I'll handle this.
Yeah.
I wish that I could have recorded the experience that I had in the hospital to use that as a teaching moment to physicians about the things that they do. And they say, and I've shared this story in the lactation consultant trainings. So my baby was born at 37 plus 1 because I had a previa. So we had scheduled C-section, and then it was a bit traumatic and a lot of things went wrong, and he immediately got whisked away from me. He wasn't breathing and couldn't breathe on his own for a couple days, and just a lot of emergency stuff. So I didn't get to do skin to skin, and I didn't get to do all this other stuff. The hospital I was at had a great experience there, and the interaction that I had with the physician was one of the reasons why I will say that about this hospital. So we were like, I don't even know, day 12 or so, where the and I don't know hospital lingo, but like the chief doctor of the NICU, and then there's like residents or interns. I don't know if that's the same thing, but like the learning doctors that are still learning were coming around to do rounds, and the chief there, she wanted Frankie to have like X number of milliliters per feed. Like each day it was, increasing to some specific number. And on this day, he still wasn't where she wanted him to be. So she was like, she put in an order to supplement or to fortify his milk. And so when they came to do rounds that day, and here's the number, and she was like, well, we need to supplement or fortify his milk because he's not getting enough, blah blah blah. And I'm just like, am like, okay, because I'm super naive, like, all right, sounds good. About 20 minutes later, as I'm sitting there and holding Frankie at the time, and like this lady in this like white lab coat comes like rushing in, she whips the curtain open, and she's like, Angie, I'm the hospital nutritionist. And she was like, I just saw this order come in for fortifying your son's milk. And she's like, are you planning to give him formula when you get home, or give him a bottle? And I was like, no, I'm going to breastfeed. And she's like, then you do not need to supplement. And she marched over to the chief of the NICU and the intern, or whatever you call them, dragged him back in, and then brought the nurse back in and said, this could potentially harm their breastfeeding relationship if you fortify, if you order a supplement. And she does not want to give this baby formula, or she wants to do nothing but breastfeed when she gets home. So I don't want you to have this order in. And the chief looks at the nurse and says to the nurse, what do you say? And the nurse is like, I agree with her. And in that moment, the chief says, well, you guys are the infant feeding experts. I'm not. Let's take it off. And then she took the order off, and he was never, given a drop of formula or supplement. And for me, in that moment, that's when the light switched on for me. And I was like, oh, these doctors aren't they don't know it all. And if it wasn't for her having her own ego in check, to rely on the people that she knows are infant feeding experts, she could have easily just been like, I know better. You're here. This is what's going to happen. And who knows what would have happened after that. But for me, I was just like, wow, they don't know everything. And I can question them. I don't have to listen to them.
A lot of those orders are very routine. Once the baby hits a gestational age, they'll just put in an order without really thinking about how the baby's feeding. I was lucky enough to have two neonatal natologists that were into breastfeeding, and one was a doctor from India that's all they do is breastfeed. And so he would come and find me, or on the floor, and say, can you help this NICU family? So there were some doctors that are very pro into breastfeeding. A lot of the ones that didn't seem like they supported were the ones that didn't know about breastfeeding. Like you said, it was more like just routine. And when I would find these families, they would just take it up like, oh, I didn't know, So I think it's just making the assumption that all babies are formula fed, and they're not. So you were lucky to have that person to really, advocate for you to change the order.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I wish I knew what her name was.
Yeah.
to
Well,
thank
and
her,
she,
'cause-
and it sounds like she had a lot of confidence in her role and
Yes.
assertiveness and in her role, because someone else like doing that same thing, they could like lose their job, right?
Yep.
Like kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
You're a 20-year-old nurse and you walk in a room and like, or like, blah, I'm
Yeah.
like, because I'm imagining the scene,
Yes.
right? Like, that's like, you are like now out of labor and delivery. You're now like working in the worst, like the worst job you could possibly imagine. So there's a lot, there's those politics.
Yep.
And that's something I would say for Teresa, and I, even though I've never worked in a hospital as an LC, I have spent a lot of time in hospitals, whether that's as a doula, but I also did a big project to get the Indian Health Service and several hospitals in the Deep South, particularly in Mississippi, that serve Black families to go baby friendly, which is, for some folks, a World Health UNICEF designation that is there to better support breastfeeding and increase bonding and attachment in babies. And so one of the things that we would do is go into hospitals and kind of do a pre-assessment and then have a meeting with the providers and the staff and say, like, these are the things we're seeing and these need to change, like based on our assessment, and definitely had to really figure out these ways. And this is where I think like my counseling skills played were a huge benefit for me, because for a lot of providers, one is like, as an LC in a hospital, like you may not even have an opportunity to talk to a provider, right? Like that chasm could be so deep that like you don't even, it's kind of like the custodian in the White House, like they might get to like clean, the Oval Office, but they don't actually get to talk to the president, right?
Yes.
Like that's kind of how I think, I know that some hospital hierarchies are. And so, one, just, I want to acknowledge like your particular role and what the environment might be that you work in. And so one of the things that I would say, and I tended to do this, is to, one, like find an ally. Like Kim said, she had 2 neonatologists that she knew were pro breastfeeding. And so if you can find like that one provider that seems to be doing just like an okay job around this, right? Like they don't even have to be champions. They just can be doing like the bare minimum, or like seem to think it's important. And then like, that's your ally and that's how you work on. And I mean, it's like adults are just like children, like we just need to build them up, right? And so, thinking about like, if I was to see a doctor do something, like I'm going to build that up and be like, hey, I wanted to tell you, like when we were just in that room with that family, like it was really great to see you, the way you listened to them and the advice that you gave them, I think was really valuable. And I just want to say thank you. And I appreciate the time that you spent with them, that kind of thing. And those are the types of interactions that people can then take with, and be like, oh, right. And then they're more motivated to do that again. Right. And again, and again, and again. And then also recognizing like that especially for physicians, like they are humans, right, with their own human experience. And what I found is that a lot of physicians who have difficulty providing breastfeeding support, or do not seem very supportive of breastfeeding, have their own breastfeeding trauma, whether that is as a person that gave birth and did not breastfeed the way they had hoped or meet their goals, or as the spouse of someone who had a problem, right? And like I learned this when I ran up against a hospital, that the medical director didn't want the hospital to go baby friendly because his wife had a hard time breastfeeding, and her, and like everything was around his own experience. So here he was making, a life altering decision for thousands of babies for the rest of time, right? Like, because his wife's feelings were hurt by a nurse. Right, like helping with breastfeeding. And so that's where I think like if we can just kind of like humanize people, build relationships with folks, sit down with someone, like hear their story, and then that might help you figure out your way of how you're going to talk to them,
Yeah.
right? Because maybe you have lunch and you visit with a physician and you learn that that's what's going on, and then okay, like me coming in all like activist like is
Mhm.
not really going to be
It doesn't
helpful.
work.
Yeah, like it's not going
No.
to be helpful for this
Yeah. You're not going to
physician,
have
that
allies
Yeah,
and you do it that
totally.
way.
Yeah, like we do have to be really gentle,
Yeah.
because again, for most providers, and I see this with nurses too, when we're giving them new information, they are going to be experiencing a lot of cognitive dissonance between like, wow, like what she's telling me or what this LC is telling me is that I've been actually like undermining breastfeeding for 20 years,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? Every single family I've worked with, I've been undermining this breastfeeding
Mhm.
relationship, or not facilitating it, or not helping them. And that's a tough pill to swallow, right?
Yeah.
And that
Mhm.
takes an immense amount of humility to be able to accept that and move forward from that. And that's just something that most humans are not going to want to do. I would be, like it's
Mhm.
hard.
Yeah.
And so if we can kind of come into it in this like just really gentle, open way and hear what it is, then like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
good.
What I did too is real quick, Angie,
That's
is
okay.
as a not only building your allies and your relationship was huge for me, because I was able to work more freely and comfortable and confident in my abilities to help those families. But I had a lot of new nurses that came into our department, and they were given a lot of formula. So I had to do like a one-on-one with them and just have them tell me about their breastfeeding experience, whether it's personal or not, and what they do to teach families. And that helped me understand their story, not necessarily my story, because I was trying to change a behavior that was going to take a lot of time and effort. But one of those was to understand where they're coming from. And once I was able to do that, I was able to empathize the reasons, again, their own trauma, their own guilt, and that came across into their breastfeeding knowledge and skills and their own bias. So again, it took a lot of time to do that. Even just doing one-on-ones with them, where they would go in and I watched them observe how they were helping families, and not their ability that they couldn't do it. It was more about what they were saying to the families, and that came across into their own trauma. So, just breaking it down, it took a long time, and then just kind of working from that point. Um, it didn't change a whole lot, but it definitely improved my relationship with the nurses, where they would, feel comfortable me calling me for anything they needed. But it just became a better working environment, I think, not just me and the nurses, but the nurses overall with families, to understand where these families were coming from too. So yeah, it's hard.
And I think like, this goes back to prevention. And so like Teresa, you're, you said July is usually the worst because of new residents. And so this is actually like my favorite time to get providers. And so you might be able, if we can prevent physicians at the very beginning from causing this harm, that means getting them this early, right? So when those new
Mhm.
residents come in, maybe you like, if you're the hospital LC, I don't know if you work under like the nurse, or if you're a nurse or LC, anyways, like it kind of varies on the hospital dynamic and the hierarchy within a hospital. But like Kim said, doctor or physicians and providers would round with her, and you could say like, hey, I really want, for August is National Breastfeeding Month. For the month of August, can one resident kind of round with me each day, or spend one day
Mhm.
with me, one shift, right? They work like 28 hours a day or something like that, right? Like they can spend a shift with you, and just saying like, I just want them to spend some time with me, or being really open with the residents of like, hey, like if you ever have any questions about breastfeeding or whatever, like my door is always open, please come and talk to me. I know I get to do a breastfeeding talk with the residents at the Seattle Indian Health Board every year when they come on. And so if there's any type of arrangements that you can make with them or their school, or have it be part of the policy, then we can prevent this stuff from happening from the get-go, because it is hard to
Yeah.
teach like an old
Yeah.
dog new tricks, right?
Yeah.
Like it is
Yeah.
hard to kind of do that. But if we can prevent it from happening by getting these little baby doctors, it's just going to be
Yeah.
like that much easier in
Yeah.
the future.
They probably won't do a whole shift, but maybe
Right.
even like 2 feeds.
Two feeds,
Yeah.
2
nice.
feeds is
See,
good.
that's the
Yeah.
optimism. I don't work in a hospital.
I'm like,
Yeah.
Cammy would never
How do
happen.
you say you don't work in a hospital without saying you don't work in a hospital? Have a resident spend a whole shift with the lactation consultant. That's how. Anyway,
Or tell the doctor, are you the
Bro?
Yeah.
bro? We know I don't work in a
See?
hospital, and I never will. And I know that people don't do that. Just in case you guys need to get that. I got that. Looks like we have one more question, and then we'll just kind of wrap it up. Have you found that they recommend formula more since the pandemic? We have seen almost all of our mamas going home with formula since the pandemic. Have you guys noticed that at all?
For me, I didn't see a whole lot of change. Our rates were always not good anyways. The only time we bumped up any kind of increase of breastfeeding is when we did delayed baths, but baby not getting a bath for hours.
Oh, yeah.
That's but as far as formula, I mean, it was always doing both, always on have enough milk and but I didn't really see like a whole.
yeah.
It was the same.
Yeah, I can't say so much like what people are coming out. I know as LCs when the pandemic first started, we were really like, we thought breastfeeding rates were going to go up. Like, we're like, this is it, right? Like, this is this like real life, we are living in a pandemic. This is exactly why breastfeeding is important, is it protects babies, and we're going to have antibodies against this illness that goes into our milk and protects our babies, right? Because for so long, like, because we have medical advancements, like the things that breastfeeding historically protected us against, it doesn't matter as much because we have antibiotics, or we have urgent care, or we have an ER and NICUs, right? And we have these places that can fix the problems that not breastfeeding causes, and so with COVID, it was like, oh, this is it. A lot of people are going to be breastfeeding. And then I also kind of thought like a lot of people would be breastfeeding because more people were home, it was like, oh, people are home. They're spending more time with their babies. They're working remotely when they weren't able to before, things like that. And I know that there was massive disparities between who had to go to work and who got to work home. So I want, I know that, but I just really thought it would increase breastfeeding rates. The breastfeeding report card that should be coming out any day now will have the 2020 breastfeeding rates, and I'm really interested to see like
what happened,
and if they increase, because what I saw, the reality of what I saw wasn't so much, I can't speak to people being given more formula or being recommended more formula at birth, but is that the isolation of the pandemic really negatively impacted breastfeeding, and so it was this thing of like, oh, like all I've wanted is for people to just be able to be home with and be with their baby, but I didn't mean this, right? Like I didn't mean
so it's your fault
that there's that there's no grandmas, there's no aunties, nobody's coming and visiting, there's no one cooking food, there's no no connection to community, and that can just be really heavy. And I know a lot of you experience this personally, but also like as folks working in this community, you've seen that isolation. And so now I'm not so sure like where the rates are going to be. I think I unfortunately, like, I think that Americans as a whole, like, we're so entitled and just feels so like feels so invincible when it comes to things, that I don't feel like even a global pandemic was going to change this. I am interested on the formula shortage though, that's occurred and we won't know these rates for another year or two on what the formula shortage has done. But I have seen more people kind of like wanting to breastfeed because they're concerned about their access to formula. I just saw a mom the other day that's actually breastfeeding really well, but she's doesn't love it, like, is just like, she's, just not super crazy about it, was really considering switching to formula. But then she was like, but this formula shortage, like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I really want to do that because I'm not going to be able to, like, I might not be able to get it. And what if it happens again? And I'm like, yeah, totes.
Yeah.
Right. Like, what if, yeah, because it is going to happen again. It actually happens every year. We just don't, this was just a
Mhm.
really big shortage. But
Yeah.
those are just all things to think about when we think about like how we talk to families about it, is that breastfeeding is the most sustainable way to feed an infant. And so and particularly for our Native communities, or rural or more like disenfranchised communities, breastfeeding is just really important for our babies because we are the ones who are disproportionately affected by a formula
Mhm.
shortage, by, a lack of clean water, et cetera, et cetera, et
Yep.
cetera. So
Mhm.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up.
Cool.
Again, thank you for another awesome chat and
Mhm.
another awesome, some more lessons for all of us. Thank you to
Thank you,
everybody.
Teresa.
Thank you for joining us. Thanks for taking
Yeah.
time out of your day to come learn and have some conversations. So if you are not registered for any of our future talks, we have 6 more between tomorrow and Friday that we'll be doing. You can find all the information on so I'm not the best at the social medias. I got an Instagram and a Facebook is slightly better. I'm slacking on the Instagram uh Nooni Project page, but you can just go to nooniproject.com, the website, and look up registration information for the upcoming webinars that we have tomorrow and Friday. So we'll have a few more conversations, and please be sure to share this with any folks that you think might be interested. Again, the target audience for these talks are for non-Indigenous healthcare providers in whatever capacity that may be. But we welcome anybody, and anybody who's interested and wants to come learn, and especially learning from these two, because they've got a wealth of knowledge, and I love being in conversation with them. So thank you, Kim. Thank you, Cami, and also Mark behind the
Yeah.
camera,
Thank
running
you.
the boards for us. Thanks, guys. We'll
All
see
right.
you next time.
Toksha, see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bamapi.